Welcome to the Data Science Institute's virtual seminar series. My name is Dr. Sarah Mackey from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Here at Lawrence Livermore, data science has become an essential discipline in many of our key program areas. LLNL is home to many challenging datasets, as well as home to some of the world's most advanced supercomputers. Our data science staff work in a variety of areas, including machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, statistical inference, predictive modeling, and uncertainty quantification. The Data Science Institute acts as a central hub for our lab's data science activities. We host events like this seminar series in order to introduce new ideas and potential collaborations to our laboratory staff. We invite speakers from outside the laboratory, from the Bay Area and beyond, to share their innovative approaches with our data science community. We're pleased now to include a wider audience in our seminar series through these recordings. You can read about past speakers at our website at data-science.llnl.gov, or you can email us at datascience@llnl.gov. Thank you and enjoy the seminar series.
It's now my privilege to introduce our speaker, Professor Newsha Ajami. Dr. Ajami is the Director of Urban Water Policy with Stanford's Water in the West program. She's a leading expert in sustainable water resource management, smart cities, and holistic approaches to ensure access to water, energy, and food. She uses data science principles to study the human and policy dimensions of urban water and hydraulic systems. Dr. Ajami served as a gubernatorial appointee to the Bay Area Regional Water Quality Control Board, and she's currently appointee to the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. She's a member of the National Academy's Board on Water Science and Technology, and before joining Stanford, she served as a Science and Technology Fellow at the California State Senate Natural Resource and Waters Committee, where she contributed to water and energy-related legislation. So she has published many highly cited peer-reviewed articles. She's co-authored 2 books, and she's even contributed to opinion pieces in the New York Times. So Newsha, thank you for joining us. Go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're all well. So I'm going to start on this topic of trying to use digital revolution as a way of assessing water use dynamics under climate stressors and policy regimes. Let's make sure I can. Okay. So as some of you might know, water security is one of the 21st century's grand challenges, and many parts of the world is experiencing water security issues, water access issues at any given time. We all depend, many of the world, obviously California and the US and most of the developed world, depends on the 20th century centralized water infrastructure system to bring water to us. While these systems have been quite valuable and have enabled our social and economic growth over the past century, they are limited by various ways. One is they are built as a once-true system, so water comes into our communities, our cities, our towns, use it once, and it leaves the system, or leaves our, and then needs to be treated and put back to the environment. Also, this system is based on water abundance. There's always more water to go and bring to us. Hydrologic stationarity, climate would repeat itself, and we'll have more and more, everything will be repeated, and we can depend on that stationarity as a way of predicting what happens in the future and how we operate these systems. And also steady and perpetual demand growth, meaning that as population grows, demand is continue to grow. So we need more supplies. However, this water sector, water system that we have, and the water sector as a whole, is facing many modern challenges. Climate change, increased frequency and severity of extreme events from droughts, wildfires, floods, urbanization. 68% of the population of the world will be living in urban areas by 2050. 60% of those cities and communities have not yet been built. Aging infrastructure, we just passed an infrastructure bill. We have a lot of these infrastructure that we built during the past century is reaching the end of their lifetime, and they're having a lot of issues. And also there are a lot of competing demand between the environment and the human needs, and these competing demands are impacting our water availability. So to address these challenges, we really do need new approaches to urban water management. You probably might have heard diversifying our water supplies, building additional supply sources, decentralized system, infrastructure modernization, trying to use data and technology to make our system more efficient, using multi-benefit projects, and also conservation efficiency. And understanding water use is the fundamental need to the process of supply development and demand side management. Otherwise, we are, planning for the future in the dark. So that's the motivation for this study. And as I said at the beginning, the water system that we have is currently built on this perpetual and steady demand growth. And this is what I'm going to focus on a lot in this talk, which is like, is that true? Is the demand growing all the time? And if it's not, what is really impacting water demand change? So as I said, originally the thought was population and economic growth are drivers of water demand. However, what we have seen over the past actually 30, 40 years, that is actually not true. Just to give you a sense in this specific graph that you see here, y-axis water demand, x-axis is the years, and you can see between the 40s and the 70s in this particular city, water demand was growing, and then since the 70s, water demand had been quite steady. All the dashed lines that you see on the top are the predictions, our water demand predictions at any given time. And you can see every one of these have been over predicting where the demand projections would be. And if we were building infrastructure based on these demand projections, we would by now have a lot of stranded assets that we would not need to meet the demand that we have right now, because as you can see, demand has been sort of declining, or actually steadily has been steady or declining over time. And you can see the specific city, they have been adjusting their demand. This was city of Seattle, but this is not just there, like San Diego, Phoenix, and Washington, D.C. I have the examples here. You can see, again, this is the actual demand, the line that you see, the red line here and the blue line here. And the lines that you see on the top are the projections. And you can see all these cities have been projecting that demand is going to grow. However, the actual demand has not been growing. And this is interesting because, for example, Phoenix, the population of Phoenix have been increasing steadily. This is Washington, D.C. This line is the population. You can see the population almost doubled over the past 50 years. So it's kind of like you can see that the projection is definitely not reflecting the actual demand. Water use demand is complex. The drivers, as I said, originally was very much focused on climate, demographic, economics. That's what we always thought it's driving demand. However, the emerging and understudied drivers include public awareness. People are becoming more aware of water use and trying to change their behavior. Urbanization, the efficiency that we have in our system. Non-residential irrigation, I'm going to talk a little bit about this, like using different kind of water for outdoors, or actually trying to reduce outdoor water use. Recycled water, because as you recycle more water, less water is taken out of the system. So a lot of these are dependent on the human behavior. And demand is also very much sensitive to external factors such as droughts, fires, floods, recessions, pandemic. All these shocks and stressors can impact demand's trajectory. And also some of the policy shifts and new codes and standards can change demand. Also some of the technological advancements. So all these needs to be accounted for. So here we are trying to use, as I said, emerging data sources to uncover these dimensions of water use to better understand where the demand is going. I'm going to focus on 4 distinct studies. The first 2 was going to focus on media as a source of data, and also online platforms such as Zillow as a way of understanding the water use, the relationship between water use and drought saliency and water use and the evolving urban forms. And the other two are going to focus on outdoor irrigation and outdoor water use or non-residential water use. And we are going to use advanced metering data, or smart meters as everybody calls them, and also using satellite data to better understand how much water is used outdoors and what is the relationship between irrigation, vegetation health, and water use patterns overall. So the first one, as I said, it's the first two are going to focus on customer level water use, and the first one is going to look at the public awareness as a driver of demand. The question we are trying to answer here is for what demand patterns are we configuring our city's water infrastructure system? So the time period we focus on was the 2012-2016 California drought. As you know, it's crazy that we are back in a drought again. However, the 2012-16 was unprecedented severe drought California was experiencing. Many of our reservoirs by 2014 were empty, didn't have much water. Folsom Dam and Lake Oroville, you can see on the left on 2014. And there was a drought declaration by the governor in 2014 and also outdoor water restrictions. And in 2015, Governor Brown went to the mountains to measure snow, as you can see on the right side, and there wasn't any snow. So then he basically put in place the first ever mandatory urban water use reductions, which were lifted in 2016 as soon as we started getting more rain. The drought was unprecedented, not because of its hydrological and climatic situation, but also because it received a lot of coverage by the media. It was a period of political calm in the U.S. and not much was going on, so a lot of focus was going into California's drought and the severity of it, and the fact that we were so low in water. One of the questions that we were asked by one of the utilities that we were working with was, do you know what's going on? Because people are not using much water and they have not changed their policies, or they were not necessarily promoting water conservation. So they were wondering what is impacting water use. So we decided it might be, we hypothesized probably is media coverage that's linked to changing water use behavior. And we sort of got into tracking this. First, we had to get the media data. First, we decided to use some of the existing tools such as ProQuest, Newsbank, LexisNexis. Obviously, they're a little bit more inflexible. The data was much more limited. We looked through them and could identify some missing data. And obviously, we have access to them at Stanford, but they need subscription, and so it was costly. So we decided to develop our own web scraping platform called Articulate. It's basically a Python that sits on Google search engine API and basically search for articles. And we used multiple terms, including California drought, water conservation, and a number of other terms, and search the web. So to just show you how the climate media complex worked during that period, this graph shows monthly Palmer drought severity index. It's an index that sort of combines precipitation and temperature to measure the severity of drought. And as it's above zero, it shows it's a wet year, and below zero, it's a dry year. And as it goes deeper, it's basically drier and drier. And obviously, as it goes bluer, it becomes wetter and extremely wet years. And what you see here is two specific droughts. One is the drought of 2017 to 2009. And then the second one, 2012 to 2015. And And then we used Articulate to track media coverage of the drought between 2006 and 2015. You might wonder why we cut this off in 2015. If you recall, I said in 2015, the governor actually put in place mandatory water use restrictions, and we did not want to pass that period because it would mix up our data and we could not really aggregate, distangle the difference between respond to mandatory reduction and the media coverage. So we only focused on the period that was a voluntary period to see if people are responding to voluntary calls. And what you see here, this period, 2007, 2010, we did not get a lot of media coverage of that drought. You might recall this is 2008, we had a recession. And also we had an election of the first African-American president. So there's a lot of other political topics to be covered, and California drought was not necessarily on top of mind, so we did not get a lot of coverage on that drought, even though Governor Schwarzenegger did declare drought emergency. However, in this period, what you see here, we looked at 9 highly circulated national and just to emphasize 9 highly circulated national and California newspapers: New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, SF Gates, just San Jose Mercury. So like 9 of these highly circulated national and California newspapers were used here and accumulated the data to get these numbers. And what you see here, as the drought severity increased, the number of articles we would get bi-weekly increased. So at some point we got up to more than 250 articles in 2 weeks about California drought. So to test if this impacted water use behavior, what we saw was we looked at the city of Costa Mesa, which is in Southern California, and we wanted to see how water use changed there as a result of this media coverage. We used bi-monthly water bills, about 16,000 single-family and multi-family residential customers we got data for. The data was from 2002 to 2018, but remember, we basically wanted to look at the data, the media coverage for that period. We use raw billing data, which then we try to figure out which customers stayed in their house between the 2002 to 2018, because we wanted them to experience both droughts at different times and be able to kind of have some normalcy in the process. And also we wanted them to have complete data. Sometimes they're missing meter readings and all that. So at the end, we ended up with about 8,600 customers, 17 years of data, 6 readings a year, about 1 million data points. So we built a random forest model based on known demand drivers: weather, price, and economics. Economics meaning unemployment, and we use unemployment as a driver of economics. And then after that, we basically use that model on the data to calculate the residuals. Basically, the residuals would be independent of these factors because they were already incorporated in the model. And we used 4 specific policy regimes. As I said, 2002, 2018, we used the period to train the model between 2002 and 2012. And then after that, between 2012 and 18, we divided it to 4 different policy regimes. Voluntary, basically there was a drought, but there wasn't any action taken, political action. Then there was a voluntary period that they asked people to change their water use. And then there was a mandatory, that was the 3rd time period. And then the post-mandatory, that's when the governor lifted the drought restrictions. So there were 4 distinct policy regimes that we were interested in. And then we performed change point detection to see how water use residuals have shown where they have shown significant, like a change from their mean and standard deviation to basically see how much change has happened. And then we did a meta-analysis to basically figure out how these individual customers collectively behaved over time. So to show you the public awareness due to media coverage, and if this is something we saw, you remember there were 4 distinct policy regimes. What you see here is the probability of negative change that the customers might have. There are 3 distinct customer groups. Single-family residentials that use they had low water use, single-family residentials that had high water use, and the multi-family residences that people who live in, townhomes, multi-unit buildings, the HOAs. So, and then even though these are positive probability of consumption decrease. So the higher the probability, the more reduction has happened. And what you see here, which is interesting, I want you to focus on this second panel here, second column here on all these 3 panels. Especially on the top 2, what you see is we got the most amount of reduction during the voluntary period. And if we look at the media coverage and the drought awareness, to basically understand drought awareness, we also looked at the Google search indexes. So basically, we use the same terminologies that we use to identify number of articles, and then we looked at the Google search index to see how many people searched these terminologies. And that was showing that people were sort of responding to the articles that are being written. And 2 things to notice here. One is look how closely Google search index, the black line, is covering the number of articles, which is the dashed line. And the second thing is you can see that this period cumulatively got a lot more media coverage, and a lot of these people responded during that period to drought reduce their water use. Actually, their peak was during this period, and some of them actually during the mandatory, they had already done a lot of the conservation, so they didn't do much. Then we looked at, we sort of created this sort of customer accounts to understand was this sort of these drought responses, were they heterogeneous or homogeneous? And what you see here is that these are groups, all these customers grouped in based on their behavior. Again, pre-drought, voluntary period, mandatory period, post-drought. And these are basically sort of using the simple way of demonstrating how water use behavior changed during these periods. What you see is, for example, majority of people reduced their water use during the voluntary water use, and then stayed the same during mandatory and post. And some didn't do anything. Some basically reduced and then went back. One thing very, very important I want you to notice here is utilities often think the behavior is very much falls under this category, which is people reduce their water use and then go back to where they were before after the drought is over. What you see here is the majority of customers did not fall under such a category. Often, a lot of them actually, what we saw was 80% of the customers that conserved water, basically that conservation happened during the voluntary period before the restrictions were imposed. And only 30% of the customers rebounded after the drought was over. Now, we wanted to more closely look at that. We wanted to see how much these water use restrictions survived once the environmental or water scarcity cues were gone. And just look at this scatter plot with What you see here on the x-axis is the savings, how much water how much customers reduce their water use, and then the y-axis is showing you rebound, how they went back. And what you see here is the majority of the customers, the more they saved, the less they rebounded. So you can see that a lot of these people did save a lot of water and they never rebounded. To more accurately estimate this, we coupled a survival model with a change point detection model to better understand rebound. Basically, we use the accelerated failure time model, which is a model that's used a lot of time in a medical field to understand how different treatments can have an impact in the long term or a short term. And what we divided the rebound to two different groups. Rebound, people who rebounded any amount, as long as they reduced their water use and went back, even if it was little. The second group was the effective rebound. Those were the rebound that was 70% of the conservation that they did, basically reversed. What we found here was a couple of things. One, now here we have 4 different customer categories: single family water users, only water use indoors, single family with indoors and outdoor water use, multifamily only indoors, and multifamily indoor and outdoor water use. What they found was only about 25% of the customers. So what you see here is basically the probability of survival, which means that around this area, 70% of the customers, 75% of the customers, actually their conservation survived. So they did not rebound after conserving after the drought. And what you see here is, the circles represent effective rebound, and the triangles represent any rebound. So I'm going to focus on circles. And what you see here is this: the conservation effective rebound was actually, it took 8 years for some customers to even rebound to where they were before. So a lot of those lasted for a long, long time. So just before I go here, again, just emphasizing on the fact that if people are not rebounding and if they're changing their water use, the demand is not growing, right? Even though the population is growing. So it's important to keep that in mind. The last part of the talk is going to focus on outdoor water use. Again, the same question, different parts of it. Here, we are very interested to know how this is still water use on the customer water use. This one, we wanted to see how evolving urban patterns impacts water use. For this, we came back to Redwood City. It's a city close to San Francisco, between San Francisco and Stanford. There are 86,000 residents, 18,000 single-family residentials. And we actually worked with Zillow to get their water use data. To do this, we had to integrate customer-level water use and geocode them and match them with Zillow data. We were interested in Zillow because we wanted to see how urban form is represented in the region, in Redwood City: number of bathrooms, property value, home value, number of rooms, the year it was built, the lot size, number of units. And then we also combined that with online census data platform, Simply Analytics, to basically see if education and other socioeconomic or sociodemographic data is representing people's water use. Often people say, in addition to climate and economics, sociodemographic is very important. For example, people in low-income communities use less water. People in high-income communities use more water. So this is what we were trying to test. So we had about 6, after all was said and done on all the matching and geocoding, we only ended up with, from 18,000, we went down to 6,000 accounts in 46 block groups. We used the hierarchical clustering on principal component for 2 different scenarios. One for Zillow, using Zillow data, 7 Zillow components and 7 census features. And then the second one was only using census features. And we were trying to see if it changes anything. Just to give you a sense, the first one, the one on the left, is looking at clustering only on the census data. This is y-axis. Y-axis is showing average monthly water use per customer. X-axis is showing you income. What you see here, again, if you only focus on census data, it's very common that income would be the driver of water use. And you can see a lot of these people are clustered in one cluster, the orange cluster, even though their water use is very different and spreads around quite significantly. When we combine the Zillow and census features together, you'll see that this clustering pattern changes. Income is not anymore the driver of the water use. You can see that a lot of, for example, lot size becomes very important. And actually we have, even though some of these people are still high income, their water use is much less. So they actually fall under a different category. So it basically provides a better way of providing information about customer water use. Just to give you a sense, this is a very high income area in Redwood City, so as this area. But what you can see in the second clustering, we get a very different pattern. We have 5 clusters, and most of it is basically distributed among the size of the lot and also not necessarily income. So to show you this in a more sort of data, like a specific sense, what you can see is, again, average customer monthly water use, which means that we took all those years between 2008 and 17, averaged water use, and these are for different clusters. What you see here is that pink group, which is the top group, uses a lot of water. And what you see here is they're the high income group. And then what you see here, this is the green group, sorry, the blue group you see here, right here, down here. This is actually a very high income area as well. They actually live on brand new lots, highly efficient homes, and a very different system. So they actually use even less water than some of the low income and middle income communities in the Redwood City. Another thing that you can see here is that these are violin plots. Basically, it's like box plots and probability distribution in the same place. What you see is that statistically, the groups between the middle income, these 3 groups shows a lot of similarity, and they actually do not have similar socio-demographic. This is very high income and bigger homes, and this is medium income with smaller homes. So they actually have, however, they use very similar amount of water. The same periods that we had in the other study, we have it here: voluntary, outdoor mandatory water use restriction, mandatory water use restriction, self-certification, and then post that, basically the 2017, when the drought was over and everything went back to normal. One thing you see is, again, these are basically average monthly water use conservation compared to 2013 when the drought started. And something, again, interesting here is what you see is everybody reduced their water use because the outdoor water use restrictions went in place during this period, and the water use reduced. They reduced their water use. When you go during the mandatory, you can see, again, these groups, the green and purple, who had the biggest outdoor space, they reduced their water use even more. However, this group, which is the newer homes, new development, they could not go any further. And then as soon as the drought was over, this group rebounded fastest because their conservation mostly happened indoors, not a lot of outdoor water use. However, these groups they had more outdoor water use, they did not rebound it as fast. So these new homes that are they're much more efficient. They don't have as much flexibility in their reducing water use. The second study is so the second group of study. These two.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yes,
from the
absolutely. Absolutely.
So Andy asks, this begs the question as to what the non-rebounders do for the next drought. At some point, there's less to conserve, all other factors unchanged.
Yes. So the non-conservative, like the people who haven't conserved, eventually be potentially during the mandatory water use restriction period, they have to reduce their water use, and they rebound because they go back to watering their lawns and using whatever they did in their homes. However, the structural changes that people make in their water use, for example, replacing their lawns or replacing their fixtures, those are the ones that are lasting. And we right now don't know what percentage of those people that have made a structural use are out there. Because I know that utilities often offer rebates and all that for people to change their water use or replace their fixtures. A lot of that is not that significant compared to what people do on their own. So there's no way of tracking who is doing what. Not sure if that answers your question, but basically, this is what we are trying to figure out because utilities need to know what happens eventually. If your question is mostly focused on, okay, you know what, demand is going to harden at some point if we hit the bottom, so there's no more water to be saved. I caution you because, for example, in San Francisco right now, we are using about 37 gallons per person per day. And there is outdoor water use in San Francisco as well as dense housing. However, for example, in there are parts of the state that people are still using 130 gallons per person per day. So there's still a big, big difference between those two numbers. So there's a lot more to be saved. So we are trying to understand, and a lot of that saving would lead into sort of saving water for the future, enabling people to have more water for the future. Okay, so the next set of these is and I think this sort of also gets to Andy's question, is like large landscape irrigation and conservation behavior, which is, I think, is a very important part. You know, often people say, why lawns? Who cares about lawns? All this agricultural water use that's being used. But you might be surprised to know that the biggest crop that we grow in the US is actually lawns. We have an obsession in this country with lawns. They're the biggest crop, and they use more water than the 7 next big irrigated water users that agricultural water users that we have, including corn, rice, and a lot of other ones. So lawns are quite a weight on our water system. Just in California, for example, just looking at urban water use, almost half of our water use is used outdoors. The portion I want to focus on is this large landscape irrigation, because it's about 10% of our water use. And you might wonder, what does that translate to? Let's say if we eliminate this chunk by itself, it's about 0.9 million acre-foot of water per year, which provides water for about 2 million households. Okay, 2 million households, every household 4 people, about 8 million people. So basically a quarter of the population in California. Just to give you a sense how much water that is. And this is basically commercial, industrial, outdoor water users, and multifamily residential associations, lawns that are outdoors. So the question is, what drives water use and conservation in these large landscape irrigations? Again, going back to Redwood City, for this specific study, we had smart meter data, and we had a very naturally built project for us because these are, we actually got the AMI data. As I said, we processed that data and basically and we had a natural experiment because we have customers that use portable water use for their outdoor spaces, and we have people who use recycled water use for their outdoor spaces. And they actually go across different groups for industrial and HOAs. One thing that's very interesting, again, here is the policy regime was not very consistent across these two groups. People who were using potable water use, they actually did not, they had to reduce their water use, so they were under the mandatory water use restrictions. However, the people who were using recycled water use, they were under no restrictions. They were actually encouraged to use more water even during the height of the droughts, because their water use assumed to be independent of water availability and scarcity that we were experiencing. However, interestingly enough, that's not what happened. What we saw was even the recycled water users, even though they were not required to change their water use, here in the purple, you can see they did change their water use over the drought years. Another interesting thing, again, this is conservation hotspots. We did a hotspot analysis and neighborhood norms, trying to understand how people change their water use. And what you see here, this is the area that still uses potable water use for their outdoor spaces. And this is the area that's using mostly recycled water. And the redder it is, the more conservation we have experienced, and the blue is less conservation, but still there is conservation happening. What you see is the bigger conservation obviously was achieved over the area that were under restriction for outdoor water use. And another interesting thing is you can see that over the years, this started growing. So, for example, let's focus on this region that's using recycled water mostly. You can see that even though they were not under restriction, a lot of their water use started growing in their community. You can see that the neighborhood norms are impacting people's behavior. Same as here, you can see there is a cluster around neighborhoods as they conserve more. So people learning from each other, they can see they're changing their behavior, they're following. Another interesting thing was we were trying to see what kind of conservation rates, how does this impact vegetation, right? So for that, we used the sort of aerial imagery. We used the AMI data, and then we combine that with aerial imagery from National Agricultural Imagery Program. These are flights that go over land. They don't have a very high temporal resolution, but they have a very high spatial resolution. So we only had data for the summer of 2010, 12, 14, and 16. And what that actually, after combining all this data, we only ended up putting all this big data together. We only landed with 72, ended with 72 parcels that we had complete data for. Two things to follow. One is, as you can see so the greener it is, as it goes to gray, you can see the greenness reduces. And you can see between 2010 to 2014, the greenness significantly reduced, and then gradually coming back by 2016. The bottom part is showing the monthly temperature, basically anomaly from 30 years ago. From 30 years normal. So if this is in Fahrenheit, what you can see here is that this period, as you have probably heard this, the recent drought we experienced was much hotter than normal, and that was driving a lot of the impacts that we were experiencing from the drought. And we wanted to see what happened with different customers that we had with potable water users and recycled water users. If you follow me here, I can walk you through this. This is greenness. Basically, this is showing you average summer weekly water use, and this is showing average summer greenness. And what you have here is the 4 specific years, 10, 12, there wasn't any drought 2010, then we started having a little bit of a dry period in 12, and then 14, severe drought, and then 16, we were bouncing back and got more rain, and the heat sort of broke down. And what you see here is between 2010 to 2012, even though water use reduced, greenness also reduced. 2014, people tried to compensate for the reduction in greenness. They used more water, but their greenness even more dropped. in 2016, this is the most interesting part of this graph, is that people even use their water use even more because of all the restrictions that put in place. But look how fast the vegetation greenness bounced back by 2016. So it didn't matter how much water people used outdoors. The greenness was very much driven by the heat and the precipitation that we were experiencing. And the same thing for the recycled water users. Remember, they had no restrictions on them, but they still increased their water use between 10 and 12, couldn't maintain greenness. By 2014, they reduced their water use. Their greenness dropped as well. By 2016, their water use was even more reduced, but their greenness bounced back to the level before 2012. So you can see that outdoor spaces, regardless of how much water we have been giving them, they were not really surviving because of the heat. Just to wrap this up, sustainable and resilient water future really needs to have a better sense of having humans and human behavior in its loop. Right now, that's not how it works. And it's very much supply side driven. We don't really think about demand as a driver of supply planning. And what I was trying to show you here is that if we harness some of these unconventional data sources, we can basically use that as a lens to explore the interaction between human and water systems, and better understand understand how water use patterns are changing, what's driving water use, and eventually can help us to make better decisions when it comes to infrastructure investment. Obviously, we are scratching the surface here. There's so many other things that needs to be explored, but I was trying to kind of give you some sense of what's going on with the work. And I just want to acknowledge my colleagues and students who have worked on these projects. And oh, not here. Here you go. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks, Newsha. That was really, really interesting. So many fascinating projects that you've worked on. I'll kick us off with a question. I'm wondering, what do you think, how we can take the lessons learned from the studies you've done about the past 2 droughts to best manage the current drought that California is in?
Sure. Look, I think the key here is there are 2 things that are happening. One is right now we have this infrastructure money that's coming in, right? And we are planning to invest it in different ways. So what demand patterns are we planning that money for, right? So that's one question. The second thing is every drought is sort of, as I sort of showed here, has its own impact on water use and rebound that we have to account for. And I sort of see these droughts as sort of like a hammer that's hitting on top of the water use and sort of keeping it down. So for utilities, it's important to use this kind of information and knowledge and insight to better understand their water use, and potentially can use this to target the groups that are not as much responding to the calls for voluntary water use reductions, to reduce their outdoor water use and all that.
Thanks. It looks like we've got a question from Walter in the chat. Walter asks, how do you assess Mark Risen's Cadillac Desert as a history of the focus of water in the use in the West?
I mean, at the beginning of my talk, I mentioned the concept of abundance, right? So we actually built these cities and communities very disconnected from our water source. Nobody really, people know a lot more right now than they used to, but a lot of people, if you ask them if they know where their water is coming from, where it goes, they don't know. And Cadillac Desert is fascinating just because it sort of demonstrates that if you combine that with what's going on right now, you can see that we have passed the sustainable level of water use in our state, and However, we still have people who don't understand it, and they grow grass everywhere or use water in a not very mindful way. So I think everybody should read Cadillac Desert, obviously. But also, I think it's very, very important for us to help people understand the complexity, the limitations that the system we have sort of bears, and how that should impact the way we move forward. You know, it's interesting because everybody wants, for example, I get all these questions around, why can't we just build a desalination and solve all our water supply problems? Because we are not very sustainable on the use side. Why should we invest in an infrastructure that's environmentally very harmful in some parts and I would say has a very significant environmental footprint when we can't even manage our own side of the equation, which is the demand side?
Thanks. It looks like we have a question from AJ. AJ, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Or I can read it. Maybe you don't have the ability to do so on your machine.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I had stepped away from my machine, hoping to get the answer to the question. But I was going to ask, what one new data set related to water use would you like to have access to? It doesn't have to be something that you know is already instrumented. What could we instrument, or what would you love to see instrumented, or what new data would you like to work with here in California if we could get access to it?
Sure. First of all, I mean, it would be amazing to get smart meter data for all the cities that we can then we can use to understand how the water use is changing. So that's one thing that we have been looking at. One area that I haven't talked about here in the study, and I think it really needs attention, is industrial and commercial water use. And we have been sort of looking into that, and a lot of the data we are using right now is from Yelp and some of the other apps that are providing information on commercial practices, but they are very hard to sometimes some of them are hard to get, some of them are hard to combine. So getting more information on that front would be very valuable and useful, and an area that really requires attention. Yeah, so, and a lot of other things sort of comes to mind, to be honest with you. I think, for example, we really would have hoped this NAEP data had a higher resolution, and we could sort of overlap that with outdoor water use in a better, like a higher both temporal and spatial resolution. But there wasn't any available beyond what we got. And I mean, I can go on and on what other data I would love to have, but you know, we got some energy water use data from Southern California. It would be very interesting to look at customer level water use, customer level energy use, and how those two interact. We have done some of that work in Southern California, but it's not complete, and we hope to do more of that. So hope this answers your questions, but I would love to continue if you have some ideas there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's just a huge desert of data that for those of us who have done analysis in here. So thanks for your thoughts.
Of course.
Timothy, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Oh, no mic from Timothy. Okay, I'll read. Timothy asks, has there been any effort to quantify storm surge water loss, water in excess of what is needed to maintain a healthy stream river ecosystem?
I'm not 100% sure what you mean. Are you talking about the fact that the water that's being taken out of the system and then therefore the ecosystem cannot survive? Or is it a different question? I don't know if Timothy is there and can clarify. But one thing I would say is one of the motivation behind the work we are doing is the less we take out of the less we use, the less we need to take out of the environment. And this conservation and efficiency, in a way, has a positive loop into the amount of water we take out of the, we can positive loop for the ecosystem because it can leave some more water in the environment. Having said that, always remember California is dependent on its water rights system that is quite complex and, and very old. And unfortunately, when you leave water in the river, you basically are gradually giving up your rights on that water. So it's more of a use it or lose it kind of a concept. So meaning that unless there's a legitimate way of tracking that water, eventually you can lose that water right. And a lot of utilities and water users, all of them from agriculture, industry, and urban, they're all sort of, so they're worried about that. So they make sure they use every drop of water, which we should definitely revisit and rethink and do better.
Yeah, a bit of a follow-up question from Timothy. He says, the alternative argument is more storage capacity. How much more is there to gain from additional storage?
That's an excellent question. Depending on what you're asking, what kind of storage are we talking about? I didn't go much into supply here, but happy to expand on that. So a couple of things. One is we currently depend on a natural storage that's disappearing, snow, right? So as that natural storage disappears, our current storage system that we have is not capable of managing that, the water that comes down mostly in form of precipitation and extreme events of precipitation and in different times that we weren't expecting them to happen. So there is a lot of movement around creating more natural infrastructure, natural storage infrastructure. For example, recharging our groundwater basins that are depleted right now because of the high dependence on them to maintain access to water during dry periods. So basically trying to recharge them and save the water there, or actually creating green infrastructure or other natural ways of saving water or storing water. To be honest with you, building more gray storage or gray infrastructure style storage, such as dams, there is this question of, would it really impact our access to water? And the answer to that has often been no, just partly because, first of all, that storage was used to be built to regulate the behavior of the system, from snow to melt to rain and summer water use. And we are getting a very different climatic pattern than we used to. And the second thing is it has a very significant environmental footprint, which is not very helpful when it comes to building new storage. Now we know a lot more, so that's why there's not much of a stomach to build more storage in a form of the gray storage. AJ is asking, have you observed any changes in residential, commercial, industrial water use during pandemic? Yes, actually, great question. We are doing that analysis, haven't published it yet, presented it last year at the American Geophysical Union. I have a student who is looking at Costa Mesa and how their water use changed during the pandemic, partly because we think, hopefully not, but if these pandemics become this regular event that's going to happen every decade or something, we need to know better what does it mean. And also this pandemic really shifted the work, the experience of workplace and where people want to work and how do they want to work. So that is going to impact water use patterns as well. Just to give you an anecdotal information, in San Francisco, our commercial water use is significantly down, which is a problem, obviously. It's a problem because the city depends on that sale, which is a different topic that we should talk about at some point. But yes, for sure, it's definitely impacting water use. in unprecedented ways that we don't really know much about, but we are exploring that right now.
Okay, let's see. We have one last question from Andy. I know we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take one more. Do or could any of these issues be ported over to the agricultural sector where much of the California water demand in total is concentrated?
Yeah, I mean, potentially we can definitely try to do more with agricultural water use analysis. The challenge with, I think Andy also asked about other data that we would love to have. It's very difficult to understand the agricultural water use patterns because a lot of that data is not available. We are either not metering these water use behaviors, or we are not seeing, we don't know how much these agricultural groups are using water. So it is something to look into. Having said that, I think it's important to focus, it's important to not disintegrate agriculture and urban just because we we are sort of the end user of whatever comes out of agriculture. Majority of the agricultural produce ends up in different urban areas. And one way to approach it is actually managing waste, which we are not doing right now. So it's a very complex issue and multidimensional issue, but it's definitely worth paying attention to.
All right. Well, thank you, Newsha, for taking time out of your day to come and talk to us. This was a great discussion and a very fascinating topic, both from a data science perspective and also just as humans of the world, an issue that is important to us all. I'm sure if you'd like to have further conversations with Newsha or see opportunities to collaborate with her, she would welcome an email from you if you'd like to reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah and Jen, for inviting me and for helping to set this up.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a nice, relaxing holiday, and I look forward to seeing all of our seminar participants next New Year.